Harry? Cat's ignoring me. Harry! Hey, baby. You gonna say hi to the camera? No? I've got things to do, things to see. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to my channel. If you haven't been here before, my name is Debbie and I read a lot of books. Today's book is Into the Woods by David Mark. As most people know from the rhyme, if you go into the woods, you're in for a dark surprise. That is what the cover of the book says. Well, I better just read the blurb for you. 30 years ago, 3 girls followed a stranger into the woods. Only 2 returned. The surviving pair have never been able to remember what happened or what the fate of the 3rd girl was. Local rumours talk of hippies and drugs and mystic rituals, but no one has learned the truth. This story is just what Rowan Blake needs. He's in debt. His journalistic career is in tatters, as well as his damaged body, and he's retreated to the Lake District to write. Yet even Rowan isn't prepared for the evil he's about to unearth, for the secrets that have been buried in the wood far too long. It's 448 pages. It's in crime and thriller, detective, lifestyle, travel Great Britain and nature. I guess it's because of the whole Into the Woods thing. There is elements of fantasy in there as well. Just elements of it. In the blurb it talks about the hippies, the drugs, the mystic rituals. That's where the fantasy bit comes in. Just a little bit. I had an interesting relationship with this one, I'll say that. I feel like it started off a bit slow. Some of the character names felt a bit immature. Is that the word to use? So it's just like, you've got Rowan, his sister's called Serendipity, and his sister's wife is called Jo, and which is normal, but then their daughter is called Snowdrop. Basically what happens is Rowan stumbles upon this story, he wants to find out what happened, and then his niece Snowdrop is quite interested in writing and she looks up to her uncle quite a lot, and so together they decide to investigate what happened in the 80s to these 3 girls. And so you're reading a lot about Rowan and Snowdrop when they're kind of together and doing like their journalistic things. And yeah, when you're reading the name Snowdrop a lot, I didn't quite connect the hippie storyline to it, which I should have done. It did take a while to get into it because I was reading like the odd page every so often. It took me, I want to say it took me about a month to get through the first 100 pages. And you guys know how quick I am at reading if you've been here before. But then, after the first 100 pages, yesterday, when I got in from work, it's just like, I just need to kind of power on through this. Because I'm back at work now, by the way. But yeah, I got home from work last night and it was just like, I want to just sit and have a read for a bit. And then I couldn't put it down. Everyone was going off to bed at like 10 and I was just like, I'm still on the sofa reading. Because I was like, I've got like 50 pages to go, I've got 30 pages to go. And I just had to finish it last night. So I did about 350 pages. Yeah, I did just under 350 pages in one sitting last night, over like a few hours. So once I got into it. It goes between timelines. So you've got the modern day with Rowan and his adventure with his niece trying to find out what happened to the girls, and then it keeps throwing back to the 80s and the actual event of what happened. And there comes a point when you kind of, there's a bit of an overlap where you're learning stuff in the past, what happened, but in the modern day they haven't discovered that yet. So there's a point where it's just like, oh, as a reader I know more than the main character at this point. I think there were certain points when it felt like the writing style changed, and to be honest, because you're going through a few different points of view, it's almost kind of expected for that to happen. But there were certain points when I did find the writing just a bit uppity. But yeah, as somebody who does like kind of mysteries, this was, once I got really into the mystery side of it, it's like my brain is like stopping and starting because I'm understanding what I read last night. Despite the slow start, once I got into it, I really couldn't put it down. There's definitely a really interesting storyline. It definitely didn't go where I thought it was, because as you go through the story and you've got the intertwining of what's happening in modern day and what happened in the past, at some point you expect it to kind of meet in the middle, and it kind of does, but at the same time it doesn't, because looking back on it, there's still some questions I have. It's like it wasn't all kind of like neatly tied up with a ribbon. There were still some things where I'm just like, I don't completely understand. And to be honest, I think that's kind of the point. I've just seen on Goodreads that this is actually like the first part of possibly some other books. So it's first installment of the Lakeland trilogy. That's why it'll be that I feel like some things were unanswered, because it's not its own book. There's more to it. Oh, that makes so much more sense now I know that. Ugh, I'm going to have to look at the other ones then to find out what happens afterwards. But yeah, so you got these 3 girls, and there's quite a bit of a thing about the fact that one of them is a redhead. It's the redhead that actually goes missing. But yeah, it's all kind of in a local town. It's like, it's basically where the main character kind of grew up, and then he left and came back. So everybody knows his sister, Serendipity, and that's how he manages to actually kind of get the information they need. Like, he goes around, it's just like, oh, I think you know my sister, and that's his way in to getting information out of everybody. Though obviously there were 1 or 2 people who don't want to talk. So he's mainly trying to track down the girls. It's interesting the way they word the blurb. It says 3 school friends took a walk in the woods and only 2 came back. I don't know how much to say. The story that is put out after the event is that Freya, the redhead, had gone back to Ireland, and that's where the idea of 3 came into the woods and 2 came back. It's the fact that they think that whatever happened, that Freya just decided to go back to Ireland, and then you got the 2 who stay local. That's where that story goes. Then there was also the question of, did she actually go back to Ireland? That is what they're questioning, because nobody saw her afterwards. Rowan, the main character, he's starting to question what he sees online. He's just like, is this person really here? Or is somebody posting up pictures for her? You know, you've got no current pictures. You know, the last picture that was up to date was from like March last year. And I feel like there's a lot of thing on social media and, you know, close-knit communities, and what people will do to protect a community. It's a bit Midsummer-y in a way, as in Midsummer Murders. It definitely wasn't exactly what I thought it was going to be based on, like, the cover. I definitely thought it was going to go in a slightly different direction. It is clever the way it's done. I think with the, if you go into the woods, you're in for a dark surprise. Because it makes me think of that nursery, is it a nursery rhyme? If you go into the woods today, you're in for a something surprise. Do 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 do. You won't believe your eyes. Is that it? I cannot remember the words to it, but it makes me think of like the Teddy Bear's Picnic, and so with that, it just didn't go in the direction that I thought it would, based on the fact that it employs that nursery rhyme on the front. I need to look up that nursery rhyme. If you go down in the woods today, you're sure of a big surprise. If you go in the woods today, you'd better go in disguise. For every bear that there ever was will gather there for certain, because today is the day the teddy bears have their picnic. I always just think of it as a nursery rhyme, but is it a nursery rhyme? The first thing that comes up when I type it into Google is If You Go Down to the Woods Today by Bing Crosby. I didn't know he sang it. Apparently there's a rude version. Shouldn't have looked that up, should I? You go down in the woods today, you're sure of a big surprise. I think it's just because of using the if you go into the woods today, you're in for a dark surprise. It made me think of the nursery rhyme, which made me think of the Teddy Bear Picnic. And so, I guess in a way, when I think about it, and think about how the events of what happens in the woods with the girls and the whole story, it's quite clever. Because throughout the book, it's implied that the girls went willingly, and that they just got really drunk and had a fun weekend, and the fact is that they got drunk and they smoked a load of ridiculous things, and that was why their memory got wiped, because they just partied too hard. So I guess in a way, it gives you the idea of they just had it's like a wild party picnic. You can see the cogs turning, can't you? Bit of a slow start. Once you get past the first 100 pages, it is quite good. And if you're like me and you get thrown off by the names, work through it. Because when you've got names like Serendipity and Snowdrop, it was a Snowdrop. Throughout all of it, I kept thinking, are we going to find out that Snowdrop's actually a nickname for something? But no, because it's when Rowan is trying to use his sister to get information out of people. And it's just like, oh yeah, well, I know Serendipity and her daughter Snowdrop, and it's just like, yeah, it's not a nickname, is it? It's just the girl's name. But yeah, some of the names just threw me off. Because I didn't know anything about the author, I was just like, is this a sign of a young author just being really creative with names? But then as more of the story comes out and you hear more about like the hippies and the drugs and stuff, it all kind of starts to slot into place a little bit. I've realised that I've kind of blown over part of the storyline, but I don't want to say too much because a lot happens. When you, back in the 80s, is it 81? So either 81 or 83, I can't remember off the top of my head. You follow kind of the events leading up to the disappearance, and then you get to the event, which it kind of skims over. Like, the girls don't have any memory. None of it is done in the first person. It's all done in the third person. When you get to the point in the timeline in the 80s where the girls go missing, it skims over it as a way to kind of remind you that only those girls can know what happened, but even they don't know what's happened, so therefore they can't specifically say what happened. Does that make any sense at all? If you've read it, you might just understand what I mean. If you haven't read it and you're watching this because you're interested into what you might be letting yourself into, you're just going to be sat there like, what? Yeah, so the three girls are at a school called the Silverbirch Academy. It's a creation of a school that's not mainstream. It's not a mainstream school. They do like lots of yoga. There's a guy on site called Mr. Sixpence who kind of helps with like their souls and things like this. It's a really, really bad description of what's going on. There's lots of interestingly named people. Like there's a guy called Pickle. There's Mr. Sixpence. And then you also got Serendipity, who's also known as Dippy, and the daughter Snowdrop. And you can understand why when you hear some of the names, you're just like, really? But it's obviously a bit of a comment on the hippie community that's in the book. It was just, I felt like there was quite a lot to take in. Maybe because it is part of a trilogy from the looks of things. And because there were quite a few unanswered questions at the end, I hope that the other books really helped to understand everything else that happened. It's just understanding it all. It's definitely not a light read. It really does get you thinking. And there were certain points when I was just like, bloody hell, I didn't expect that to happen. There's also chapters that look at the investigating team, the detective that was kind of looking into the girls' disappearance and trying to find them, and that takes you off on a completely different storyline. So you've got what happened to the girls, what's happening in the present to find out what happened to them, then you've got the story surrounding the investigation, then you've got a completely different story that follows the detective that was in charge of that, her old detective. Oh, it's just, there's so much. There's so much. But yeah, if you're looking for a light read, this isn't it. It is a bit of a slow burner to start off with, so be prepared for that. And just keep your eyes and ears open, because there's a lot to take in, and there's some stuff that it kind of calls back to, and it's also preparing yourself for the fact that there are points when you really are so far ahead of the people in the present, despite the fact that you're reading about stuff in the past. Did that just sound like gibberish? Interesting relationship with the book, but I think ultimately I did enjoy it. It was just a very different experience based on how I felt about the characters. Because the main character, Rowan, you kind of like him, but at the same time you don't. There were times when I was just like, oh, he's a bit of a prick at times. There's one bit in particular that really stood out for me for the character of Rowan, where he's saying about, because he's an author, you know, he's writing about the disappearance of these girls, and there's a couple of times in the book actually when he says the story he wants is either that the third girl is dead or that she's found alive and well. Like, there's no middle ground. It's like he's determined to make this a story. So it's just like, if it just turns up and like there's not really much to say, it would be more of a story if she was dead. And in a way he's kind of hoping she is, because that would be a story, and also it gives him opportunity to investigate it as a journalist. You can understand how that comes across as unlikable. I understand the fact that when it comes to journalism, to have a story, you need to have something quite juicy. But at the same time, hearing it from Rowan's point of view, the idea of saying, it would be great if she was dead, that would just make the story. Because that's pretty much how it's put. And it's just like, that's really horrible. It really makes you think about the way things are portrayed in media and newspapers and just the news in general. This isn't a light read. It does really get you thinking about a lot, as you can tell. But yes, it's Into the Woods by David Mark. I'll get up the picture again. That is the cover. I feel like I've said lots and nothing at the same time. I'm not about spoiling books on here. I'm about thinking about how it made me feel in my relationship with that book and processing what I've read. But I don't want to spoil it for people if people are looking up something to get an idea whether they'd like it or not. I don't see the point in spoiling stories for people. Thank you so much for watching. My name has been Debbie. There'll be more books. I'm reading the Stephen King book at the moment. I'm reading Deborah Harkness at the moment. And I've just started a new book on BorrowBox called The Women of Primrose Square. I've done one chapter so far and that seems like it's going to be an interesting one, just because of how the first chapter ends. It's interesting because it's called The Women of Primrose Square, and the first chapter is about a guy. I'm not going to say anything more than that. So thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe if you're not already, and you can click on those bell notifications as well if you want to know exactly when I upload. It's usually on Wednesdays. So yeah, cheers. Thanks a lot. I'll see you next week. Mwah. Stay safe, everybody.